in Pharmaceuticals in association with Higher Secondary Principals Forum.
A pleasant day to one and all. I am Lorraine Carasco and I am here to teach you social institutions, continuity and change. Social institutions is not a new concept for you. You have already learnt about social institutions in the last year. The social institutions covered under chapter 3 of understanding social institutions are family, marriage, work or economy, politics and religion. In this topic, we will cover two other social institutions. They are caste and tribes. We will also be delving a little into family and kinship. Now, let's go to the first social institution, and that is caste. Caste is an institution which is unique to the Indian subcontinent. The word caste is of Portuguese origin. It comes from the word casta, which means pure breed. Now, the Indian equivalent for this word is varna and jati. As you see here, varna literally means color. It is the name given to a four-fold division of Indian society, namely Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. It is a broad all-India classification. On the other hand, the other term which is associated with caste is jati. Jati literally means species of a kind. Now, this could range from inanimate objects to plants, animals and even humanity. It's a local subclassification which varies from region to region. So, there can be thousands of subcastes or jatis in the country. Now, this institution of caste is unique to the Indian subcontinent. We find it across the spectrum of our country in terms of religions, etc. Now, some more concepts which are relevant to the caste system are purity and pollution, which are central to the caste system. The first concept is purity. Anything or anyone who is closely associated with the sacred is considered as pure. The higher caste are considered as ritually pure. On the other hand, anything which is opposed to the sacred, far away from the sacred, is considered as impure or polluted. Those castes having low status are considered to be impure. Now, let's take a simple example of oil. When oil is used in our temples, it is considered pure. Whereas, when oil is used in the kitchen to do different things, it would be considered as impure. Now, let's move on to the features of caste. The features of caste were outlined by H.S. The first feature is caste is determined by birth. We are born into our caste, the caste of our parents. We cannot change our caste. We cannot choose to leave our caste. We cannot choose to join another caste. It is an ascribed status which cannot be changed. Going on to the second one. Membership in caste involves strict rules about marriage. We are all aware that our parents would want us to get married within our own caste, and that is why, and that is called endogamy. Getting married within one's own caste is called endogamy. Caste membership also involves strict rules about food and food sharing. What food may be eaten, may not be eaten, with whom you can share it or not is all prescribed by caste. The fourth one, caste involves a system comprising of many castes arranged in a hierarchy of rank and status. Theoretically, every person has a caste and every caste has a place in the hierarchy of caste. So, every caste is either higher than or lower than every other caste. Caste involves subdivisions. Every caste has subcaste and many sub-subcastes. This is called segmental organization of caste. And lastly, we have caste who were traditionally linked to occupations. Every caste was linked to a particular occupation, and this occupation was hereditary, which was passed down from one generation to the next. Now, this is caste in the past. Over time, all institutions undergo changes, and with the coming of the colonialist, the British in India, caste too underwent some changes. In fact, it is said that caste as it exists today is a product of colonialism. Now, when the British came into India, they were intrigued, interested, very surprised by all the practices and customs and traditions of the Indians, and they wanted to know more about them. So, a lot of studies were done by anthropologists, by sociologists, by ethnologists about the Indian society. Way back in the 1880s, the census was already started, but it was the 1901 census conducted under the direction of Sir Herbert Risley that information was sought about the caste hierarchy. Now, this resulted in hundreds of petitions by caste leaders across the country claiming a higher social status for themselves and citing historical and scriptural evidence for the same. This official recording of caste, the actual writing down of caste in the census, changed the institution of caste and took on a new life. It became less fluid and more rigid. Another impact that colonialism had on caste was on ownership of land. Before the coming of the British, the upper caste were collecting taxes from the village on behalf of the different ruling emperors, kings. However, when the British came to India, the British made the upper caste landlords, zamindars, rather than just revenue collectors. Now they were owners of land. So this was another big impact, another big change which the colonialism brought in the arena of caste. Towards the end of the British rule, of course, in keeping with the divide and rule policy, the British tried to help the depressed classes, the downtrodden classes. And by the Government of India Act 1935, they decided to write down a list of castes and tribes which then came to be called as scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Let's look at the third impact towards the end of the British rule. In 1935, of course, in keeping with the divide and rule policy followed by the British decided to select some downtrodden castes and tribes and mark them out for special treatment. This was done by the Government of India Act of 1935. This lists, also called as schedules, later came to be known as scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. All these tribes, all the castes whose names were there in that list came to be known as scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Okay? Now, let's see what happened after independence. We all know that caste played a major role in mass mobilization during the nationalist movement. Caste was used again and again to mobilize the people to achieve different goals. Efforts were also made to organize the depressed classes and to abolish untouchability. These efforts came from both the ends of the spectrum. On the one side, we had the upper caste social reformers, and on the other side, we had the lower caste social reformers. Some of the lower caste social reformers were Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, Babasaheb Ambedkar, Ayoti Das, Periyar, Sri Narayan Guru, etc. Now, after independence, it was decided to abolish, all efforts were going to be made to abolish caste system. But is it going to be that simple? There are some who have enjoyed centuries of privileges, whereas there are others who have only experienced exploitation, subordination, have had no access to education. So how can both these groups be made to run on the same footing? And in keeping this in mind, our national leaders decided to introduce the concept of reservations. Reservations for SC, the scheduled caste, and for the ST, the scheduled tribes, both in educational institutions as well as in government jobs. Now, going on to the next one would think that caste system would not play a very important role in urban areas. But it showed its ugly face even in the industries in the urban areas. In Bombay, in the textile mills and in the jute mills in Calcutta, it was observed that middlemen who had to recruit people to work in those textile mills usually recruited them from their own region and from their own caste. So we often found that an entire flow in the industry was dominated by one particular caste. Let's continue further. Caste boundaries are maintained in the cultural and domestic spheres through endogamy. We have just heard in the features that endogamy means getting married within one's own caste. Today you will say that there are lots of intercaste marriages. Yes, that is true. But which type of intercaste marriages are accepted? You will find that they are accepted only if they are within the same socio-economic status. If an upper caste boy gets married to a lower caste girl, till now it is not accepted to that extent. In fact, it leads to honor killing. You must have seen in different movies examples of this, where the brother or the father of the girl will hunt down the married couple wherever they may be in the country and will even kill them, all in the name of honor, family honor. Let's go on to see what impact caste has on politics. Democratic politics is deeply conditioned by caste. we will see that people stand and people vote till now on the basis of the caste of the candidate. So, caste based politics plays a decisive role, a very important role in either winning or losing elections. However, you will also realize that today political parties have become smart. Everyone keeps their candidate from the same caste. So, it has become difficult now to predict who is going to win elections, and this entire system is become a little complex. Going forward, the upper caste seem to say that caste is invisible for them, whereas for the lower caste, caste has become very important. Why? We know that there are lots of reservations for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes for OBCs. The upper caste feel that they are not getting a fair deal. Whenever they go for any educational institution or for a job, all the jobs seem to be reserved. So they feel their caste is not doing anything for them. But they don't realize that they are in the position they are today only because of their caste. Because their parents were educated or had access to education, had access to good jobs, and therefore they can go to good schools, go to good coaching classes, all because they belong to the upper caste. Whereas for the lower caste, what happens is that their caste identity is the only crutch they have. If they do not get these reservations, they do not get a chance to have a better life, to get into educational institutions which would not otherwise give them because of their lower marks or because they do not have influence. So we see that caste seems invisible for the upper caste, and for the lower caste it seems to eclipse all other dimensions of their personality. Today, extreme practices associated with caste are no longer practiced. You are not punished when you do certain things as you were before. But caste as a system still exists today. Now there are different processes which are at play, and our sociologists have tried to come up with new concepts to understand these social processes. Two such processes related to caste are Sanskritization and dominant caste. Both these words, Sanskritization and dominant caste, were coined or framed by M.N. Srinivas. Let's look at Sanskritization. Sanskritization is the process whereby the members of the lower caste attempt to raise their own social status by adopting the ritual, domestic and social practices of a higher caste. These higher caste could be Kshatriyas, could be Vaishyas, could be the Brahmanas. So they adopt those ways with the hope that after 1 or 2 generations, they will also be looked upon as the higher caste. They will also get better social status. Now, some of the practices that they have adopted, they have emulated or copied or imitated are adopting vegetarianism. Today we are in Shravan month. We find that many people have given up chicken. Others have given up chicken and egg. There are others who don't eat fish also. And there are still others who are more particular, who practice more vegetarianism, stricter forms of vegetarianism, and they don't even eat garlic, onion or anything grown below the ground. Next is wearing the sacred thread and saying specific prayers. We know that in earlier times only the upper caste were allowed to wear these, to wear the sacred thread, to say the prayers. But today all the other castes also seem to be doing the same. And lastly, giving up animal sacrifices. There were many festivals in India where animal sacrifice was a given thing. But today, in an attempt to Sanskritize themselves, people have given up these practices with the hope that their social status will improve. Now, this process of Sanskritization is not something new, not a recent one. It existed many years ago from ancient times, but it has intensified in recent times. Now, when do people think of Sanskritizing? It is usually when they have a rise in social status, when their wealth increases, when they have good jobs, when they have a good economic standing, they also want a higher social status. That's when they adopt Sanskritization. Going on to dominant caste. This again, as I told you, is coined by M.N. Srinivas. Now, who are these dominant caste? The dominant caste are usually from the rural section of the society. They are the intermediary caste. That is, they are neither the higher caste nor the lower caste. They are in the middle. Now, these castes have a large population and they were granted land rights by the partial land reforms effected after independence. Now, at the time of independence, India was mostly an agricultural country. 90% of the population was involved in either agriculture or agricultural related activities, and yet agricultural productivity was very less. So, in an attempt to boost agricultural production, the government decided that it's going to enact certain laws, and one of those laws was Zamindari Abolition Act, by which the zamindars who had become the upper caste, who had become the zamindars, the landowners, they who were not living in the cities, they were not living in the villages, they were living in the cities. So, they were absentee landlords. They were called absentee landlords because they were not living in the villages. They used to only come to claim rent in the villages. So, these absentee landlords were removed. The land was removed from them and given to the next claimant, next layer of claimants. And these next layer of claimants were the dominant caste, these intermediary caste. Okay? So, these people had large numbers and now they became economically powerful because they became the owners of the land which earlier belonged to the zamindar, who they were only supervising, they were only collecting the land, the taxes or the revenue or the rent on behalf of these zamindars. Now they have become landowners, and because they have become landowners, they have become economically powerful. Now, given large numbers, given economic power or wealth, the next step is trying to get political power. We know that if we have a lot of people voting for us, we can easily get political power. So, in an era of electoral democracy based on universal adult franchise, these dominant caste stood for elections, won elections, and went on to become the dominant caste. They played a very important role in regional politics as well as in the agrarian economy. Some of the examples of dominant caste are the Yadavs of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, the Vokaligas of Karnataka, the Reddis and Kamas of Andhra Pradesh, the Marathas of Maharashtra, the Jats of Punjab, Haryana and Uttar Pradesh, and the Patidars of Gujarat. I hope that you have understood this first subtopic or the first social institution, that is caste. Now, let us go on to the second social institution, and that is tribes. Tribes are the oldest inhabitants of our country. They comprise of 8.2% of the Indian population. Mostly tribes are defined by what they are not. They are neither peasants, nor are they Hindus, nor do they have a written sacred text when it comes to their religion. So, who are tribes? In fact, the word tribes was introduced by the British for administrative purposes, for administrative convenience, to refer to the tribal population. Let's understand who tribes are based on the traits which are seen among tribes. The first permanent trait is region. Although tribes are found all over India, we will find that 85% of them are found in Middle India. That is in Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh, in Jharkhand, and in many other places, Madhya Pradesh, etc. 11% of the remaining 15 are found in the northeast, in Mizoram, Nagaland, Meghalaya, etc. And 3% are found in the rest of the country. Even in a small state like Goa, we have so many tribes. We have the Kunbis, we have the Gaudas, we have the Velips, we have the Dangars, we have the Vanarmares. So many tribes in such a small place. Let's look at the languages. What are the languages or language groups that these tribes speak? We have the Indo-Aryan and the Dravidian, the Austric and the Tibeto-Burman. These are all the language groups that they speak. Some of them they share with the rest of the population, others are languages which are indigenous to the tribal groups. Coming to the next one, the racial and physical characteristics. The physical character, what do they look like? Well, these are divided into 5 categories: Negrito, Australoid, Mongoloid, Dravidian and Aryan. So in these categories, the physical characteristics differ. Some of them are the same as what the rest of the Indian population have, and some are unique to these tribes. Now, going by the size, there are some tribes which are large and huge, whose numbers run in millions. For example, the Gonds, the Shantals, the Bhils, the Bodos, the Meenas, the Mundas. And there are other tribes which are so small, and these are the Andamanese Islanders, whose numbers are even less than 100. Now, going on to the next one, the ecological habitats. Where do we find these tribes? Well, we may find them in the hills, in the forests. We may also find them in rural plains or in urban industrial areas. Proceeding on to the acquired traits. Coming to the first one, livelihood. What do these tribals do for a living? So those who are in the hills and the forests will surely have fishing, food gathering, hunting and shifting cultivation, zooming or slash and burn it is called. So these are some of the things that they will do for a living. Those who are in the plains will be peasants, plantation workers, and those who are in the urban areas, they will be industrial workers. Going on to the next one, degree of assimilation. That is the attitude of the tribals towards the Hindu society. Those who have got the benefits of reservations have slowly given up their tribal ways and have acquired the ways of the Hindus. So they are positively inclined. Whereas there are others who don't want to give up their ethnicity, their uniqueness, and those people would be opposed to assimilating with the mainstream Hindu population. Now, from in the times of independence, tribes have been in the limelight. What should they do? Should they be kept isolated, or should they leave their unique ways and become a part of the nation, the mainstream society? This debate rocked the Constituent Assembly in 1940s. Those who wanted isolation said, tribals need protection. From whom? From traders, from moneylenders, from missionaries, who were all intent to reducing tribals into detribalized landless labor. On the other hand, those who wanted integration, they wanted them to be a part of the nation, said tribals were merely backward Hindus and their problems should be addressed in the same way as that of other backward castes or classes like SCs and OBCs. Now, for a long time discussions went on, and finally a compromise was reached, and this compromise was to enable controlled integration through tribal welfare schemes. Some of the examples given are 5-year plans, tribal sub-plans, tribal welfare blocks, etc. National development is very important. But at what cost? We know that for development, we need industrialization. And after independence, the government embarked on the process of industrialization. Now, for industries to run, they needed minerals. They needed to set up hydroelectric plants. And the mineral-rich places were the forests. And who lived in the forests? The tribals. The tribals, although they were inhabitants of the forest, were thrown out of their own land. They were dispossessed of their land because their land was marked out for extraction of minerals and to set up hydroelectric power plants. So, this shattered the tribal societies, all in the name of development. Their lands were taken away, their livelihood was destroyed, they had to move out in different place to a different place, all because of their land was taken for national development. Now, can anyone throw you out of your land or your house? No. Why? Because you have the concept of private property. You have your papers for your house, for your land. So, no one can throw you out of it. Then why are tribals thrown out of their own land? Tribals fall at a disadvantage because they have collective ownership of resources. They do not have the concept of private property, and any property which does not have papers as saying that they belong to a particular person or a particular family, that land is said to belong to the government, and the government can decide what they will do with that land, whether they will set up a power plant, whether they will give it for mining, whether they will give it for timber extraction. So, here the tribals fall at a disadvantage because they do not have the private property, and that is the reason why at the cost of the national development is paid by the tribals. An excellent example is when the construction of the Sardar Sarovar Dam was made over the Narmada river. So many tribals were rendered homeless in this process. Now, let us look at tribal identity. What is tribal identity? There are different issues that tribals have. And these issues are outlined in this slide. First of all, we know that tribals are forcefully incorporated into mainstream processes. They are not in favor of it, and yet they are forced to become a part of this. And this has a negative impact on tribal culture, tribal society and tribal economy. When someone is forced to do something, they will resist it, they will oppose it, and that's exactly what happened. The tribals resisted and opposed these forced changes. Whenever anyone resists and opposes, the government will counteract. And yes, the government limited the civil liberties of these people. First it was the British, then it was the Indian government, and then in places like Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand, after achieving statehood, even then they had limited civil liberties. And this resulted in powerlessness among the tribals. And this powerlessness made them rebellious, made them very angry. And then this took the form of tribal movements. This took the form of tribal movements. They opposed all that was happening to them through these tribal movements. Now, another important thing when we talk about tribal identity is that tribals were said to be egalitarian or equal. However, we find that because of the emergence of an educated middle class among tribal communities, due to the policies of reservation in education and jobs, today there is an urban professional class from among the tribals. So, we find that tribals themselves today are not equal. There are some who are educated, who belong to the urban professional class, and there are others who are still back in their forest, fighting for their land, fighting for their resources. So, there is differentiation among the tribals. Now, the two broad set of issues which have given rise to tribal movement is, first, control over economic resources like land and forest. As we have just said, they want the land for themselves because it is their home, it is their source of livelihood which is being taken away from them. And secondly, maintaining their ethnic cultural identity. The tribal identity is getting diluted. There is so much of culturalization which is taking place. They are adopting so many other Hindu customs, traditions. So, who are tribes? Who are we? Is the big question looming ahead of them. And that is exactly what has given rise to tribal movements. Now, let us go on to the last subtopic, and that is family and kinship. We have already dealt with in short last year. Family is a place where there is love, where there is acceptance. It is also the place where there is jealousy and conflict. Now, let us look at family on the basis of size. We have the joint family and we have the nuclear family. Joint family, it is said to be associated with the olden times when two couples or more couples lived together in the same home, cooking in the same kitchen with their offsprings. So, two couples and their children, or maybe two brothers, their wives and their children used to live together, eat from the same kitchen. Also, as opposed to that, let's look at nuclear family. In nuclear family, it's just one couple and their children who live in the same house, eat from the same kitchen. When we look at joint family, when so many people live together, when urbanization and industrialization took place, with the rise in education, sometimes one member or one son of the family would go to live in the city. And after he settled down, he would take his immediate family. So, joint family gave rise to nuclear family or gave way for nuclear family. At the same time, today, both the parents are required to work and there is no one to look after the grandchildren. So, we find that nuclear family is once again leading the way for joint family because grandparents are being roped in to help the parents to be able to work, because you know the work timings today. There has to be someone to be there in the house with the children. Going on to residence, we find, as is prevalent in the society, after getting married, the couple goes to live with the man's parents. That is called patrilocal. When the couple lives with the wife's family, as a rule, it is called matrilocal. And there are some tribes where the couple as a norm decide to live separately, neither with the man's parents nor with the woman's parents, and that is called as neolocal residence. Then let's go on the basis of authority and decision making. In our families, mostly it is the father who takes the decision. He is the head of the house. And therefore, those type of families are called patriarchal, where the father is the patriarch. He takes the decisions. Whereas in some societies, we have matriarchal or matriarchy, where the mother is a matriarch and she is supposed to take all the decisions. Lastly, on the basis of lineage or descent, inheritance, property, family name, all when it comes from father to son, it is called patrilineal. Whereas when it is inherited from the mother, from mother to daughter, it is called matrilineal. Now we have two societies in India which are matrilineal. One is the Nair community of Kerala and the second is the Kasi tribe of Meghalaya. Both these follow matrilineal. Now, one would think that because they are matrilineal, they would also be matriarchal, but in reality, sometimes it is the mother's brother who takes the decisions, not the oldest female member. With this, we come to the end of the lesson. Now, let's look at the questions which are important for the exam. First one, explain the difference between Varna and Jati. This could come for 1 or 2 marks. What are the defining features of caste is an important question which comes for 4 marks. Caste as it exists today is a product of colonialism. Analyze. This is another important question wherein you have to write all the 3 ways in which colonialism impacted caste. The next one, how did the inclusion of caste in the census of 1901 change the institution of caste itself? Here you have to write about the census, how petitions were addressed to the census commissioner, and the actual recording of caste, how it made it more rigid, less fluid. Caste took on a new life. Then we go on to a short note on Sanskritization. Here you have to write the definition and maybe the practices. When we look at a short note on dominant caste, that's another important question. Here we have to write about their large population, we have to write how they became economically powerful and how they became politically powerful. The next question, how does caste make its presence felt in modern times? Here we can talk about the social reformers and their efforts to abolish untouchability, to organize the depressed classes. We can write about the reservations. We can write about in industries how recruitment is based on caste. We can write about politics and so much more. On tribes, the questions which can come are, how are tribes classified, permanent and acquired traits? Then elucidate the famous isolation versus integration debate. Here we can talk about the isolationists and the integrationists and their arguments and the compromise which was achieved. Then we have tribals have paid a disproportionate price for the development of the rest of the country. We can talk about the dispossession of the tribals of their land, how their communities are shattered, how they are rendered homeless because of that community ownership of land and lack of private property, how their land is taken away for extraction of minerals and for the setting up of hydroelectric plants. So we can write all that, and that's an important question. Then write a note on Adivasi struggles. You can talk about their loss of land again. You can talk about their identity crisis which they are experiencing, the cause for social movements. Going on to write a short note on the diverse family forms. Here you can talk about on the basis of size, you can talk about the basis of residence, on the basis of authority and on the basis of lineage. Thank you very much.
Prudent Scholars, powered by Lupin Pharmaceuticals.